Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen out there. I don't know if there's too many people in the audience this evening because I don't know if some of you may have noticed that we actually posted an official postponement of tonight's official show. And I do apologize about that. We were going to be doing our Jack the Ripper show this evening, but unfortunately, I'm going to throw that up right now so everybody can see that. But unfortunately, Ron is not available tonight. And this is a subject that he's very, very fascinated by. And so, every now and again, we think that certainly we could run the show solo. Either of us could, but it's nice to do it as a back and forth, and so we are going to postpone our Jack the Ripper show until next week, and so hopefully you guys will come back, and we will be actually going on next week at 9 p.m. And we're going to be doing 9 p.m. Doing 9 p.m. going forward, because part of this is that I don't know if you realize this, but nowadays monster hunting doesn't pay the bills the way it must have once upon a time. And so most of us do have day jobs, and Ron's schedule has been a little bit tough recently, which has led to some postponements. We want to try and nip that in the bud. And so the plan is to officially go to 9 p.m. starting next week, which is January the 30th, when we will air our Jack the Ripper episode. And then after that, hopefully 9 p.m. going forward, at least for the rest of the season. So tonight, I figured I would pop on, say hello to anybody who came aboard. John, I saw you in there. That's wonderful. Good to have you back as always. As we go through the evening, I figured I could answer some questions, chat a little bit about my upcoming projects, and we can do a Q&A if anybody wants to stay aboard. And if people don't stick around for tonight, I get it. We don't officially have an agenda this evening. I just figured I would come in and say hello and not leave you guys hanging, because not everybody follows us on social media, and I didn't know that you'd all be how many people would actually come aboard tonight. So Mary Beth, always good to see you. Glad to have you back as well. So guys, welcome aboard to what I'm officially calling it's Casual Monday. So hopefully you guys are all doing well tonight. So one thing I thought that I would do is I would actually fill you in a little bit on my big upcoming projects, because I figure now that I've got the microphone and the bullhorn to myself here, I might as well. So some of you may, if you follow me on social media, have heard that I will be traveling to France in a couple of months, and which I'm very, very much looking forward to. And once again, of course, when I travel, I never travel just to go and lay on a beach anywhere. I always travel in search of something extraordinary. And so my big next project is a book which is called Hunting the Beast. And that is scheduled to come out late in 2023. As a matter of fact, pre-orders for the book are currently up now on ghostboypress.com, which is my website. And this is going to be a book on the subject of werewolves and werewolf folklore, but with a very special focus on one of my all-time favorite historical legends, the legend of the Beast of Gévaudan. The Beast of Gévaudan, we actually mentioned it briefly in a couple of our previous episodes, especially when we did our initial inaugural episode on werewolves. But the Beast of Gévaudan is a wonderful legend that dates back to the mid-1700s in rural France, when a huge beast, a monstrous creature of unknown origin, terrorized the southern central region of France for about 3 years, killing at least 100 people. In fact, this beast was almost impossible to kill, often impossible to find, always described as looking like an enormous, misshapenly large wolf. And it became so extraordinary that King Louis the 15th, if I'm not mistaken, you'll have to pardon me because I don't have my notes in front of me, but King Louis, I believe it was the 15th, actually ended up having to send troops to the Gévaudan region to attempt to kill this beast, which was ravaging the countryside and murdering his people. And the King's Dragoons were not successful in destroying this beast, but I'll save the details on that for later on. When I get back from France, we'll be doing an episode on the subject of the Beast of Gévaudan, which I'm looking forward to. But I'm also looking forward to spending some time in France, which is not something I've done before. So I'm going to be traveling in a region that is called the Rhone Alps, and a big section of France. It's extremely rural, very quiet. The image I've got up right now is a village called La Bessère Sainte Mary, which is one of the places that I'll be staying while I'm there. So it's something I'm very much looking forward to. And once again, those of you who have any interest are welcome to pop over to my website, ghostboypress.com, and then you are able to pre-order the book if you feel so inclined. So let's see here. I'll jump back on screen for a moment and chat with you guys a little bit. Hi, Sarah. Yes, today was in fact supposed to be Jack the Ripper. So, as I was just mentioning to everybody, unfortunately, Ron was stuck at work late tonight and could not make it. And in order to preserve that program, we decided to postpone that for next week. So, I do apologize. I figured I would come in this evening and do just a little bit of a chat back for anybody who decided to show up. We did post that info on our social media, but I know not everybody follows us there. So unfortunately, we will be delaying the Jack the Ripper episode until next week. And as I mentioned earlier, that's going to be at 9 p.m. And we're going to be going at 9 p.m. going forward to try to accommodate Ron's schedule a little bit better, because I know we've had some hiccups recently with some evenings where we were not able to do our show. So we would like to try to nip that in the bud and get on a little bit more of a regular schedule. So hopefully you guys will be back next weekend at 9 to join us and do the Jack the Ripper episode, which I have to tell you, I'm very excited about. I don't want to give away anything ahead of time, but I will tell you that, as with so many of these stories that we talk about, this is something I have been fascinated over for a very, very long time. And I think Ron and I both have our series, or our subjects rather, that we're fascinated by, and our theories on the topic of Jack the Ripper, who he may have been and what might have been behind the killings. And so we're going to talk a lot about that next week. So very much looking forward to it. Sarah, glad that it sounds like 9's going to work out better for you. That's a good thing. Let's see here. So I do not have an official agenda for the evening, as I said. So what I certainly welcome you guys to do. If anybody who's watching right now has questions, wants to talk about your own experiences, heck, you can talk about mysteries, monsters, and myths, of course. Questions about that, suggestions for future and upcoming episodes. We are always looking for new ideas for future episodes. Hey, you can share with me your favorite Thai restaurant if you like. I'm always willing to listen to that. So any ideas or thoughts that you guys have, I'm happy to chat back with you for a little while this evening. You did a school report about Jack the Ripper. That's very cool. Now I have to tell you, that's a dark topic to do for school. Was that high school or college? Be interested to know about that. It is a dark topic. As a matter of fact, we're doing something at the opening of our Jack the Ripper episode next week that we have never had to do before, which we're actually putting up a viewer discretion warning, because not only is the topic itself extremely dark, but it's impossible to talk about Jack the Ripper without talking about the gruesomeness of his crimes. And we will be showing some crime scene photos, which are certainly not for sensitive eyes. So please be aware of that. There will be some fairly intense content for next week's show. Why is it that all of our shows are things that you've done reports on? Well, I would say probably because great minds think alike. So I'm going to assume, Mary Beth, that we're just on the same wavelength of monsters and myths, which is a topic that it's just, there's no bottom to it. It's a wonderful and rich topic, and we have tens of thousands of years of human history for all these wonderful myths, and they just light me up, and I guess they do for a lot of you folks too, which is why we have our channel and we're really excited about it. And of course, you also, if you were here from the opening of the episode tonight, or our Talkback tonight, you may have noticed that we have updated our opening segment to include their new idea, because of course we are going to be now monsters, mysteries, myths, and monsters, to sort of broaden our horizons a little bit. And so that gives us a whole new world to explore. We're really looking forward to that. Talk a little bit about the werewolf trip to France. Well, I definitely can do that. As I say, I haven't gone yet, so there won't be a whole lot of detail. But so from 1764 to 1767, for just about 3 years, the Gévaudan region. Now, the Gévaudan region does not technically exist anymore. It is now broken up into several smaller areas, what they call the departments in France. You have the Lozère region, you have the Rhone Alps, you have all these different little regions that have been broken up over the years. But that central kind of southeastern portion of France for many, many years was known as the Gévaudan. And it was, even then, as it is now, a very remote area with a lot of very small villages, primarily poor, primarily very focused on farming. And in the late spring or early summer of 1764, something came out of the woods of a place called Mount Mouchet, which is a mountain quite close to the village of Auvers, and killed a young shepherd. And at that point in history, wolf attacks were certainly not uncommon. In fact, wolf attacks, happened every year, and a lot of people were killed. But this creature was relentless, and it began to kill again and again. The way that it killed was not like a traditional wolf. The markings on the bodies, the way it ate, and it did appear to eat portions of the bodies. Again, pardon me, because I know this is a gruesome subject, but nothing about it seemed typical of a wolf. But those people who did see the creature and lived to tell the tale, and a few people did, all said it looked like an enormous misshapen wolf. And that has led people to speculate on a lot of different things. Some people claimed that it could speak with a human voice. Some people said that it could stand on its hind legs. Some people said it had spikes or horns on its back. People even described it as a dragon at one point. So there were so many conflicting reports, but consistently one of the most common was describing it as a large but strangely misshapen wolf. In fact, I tell you what, I'll bring back an image that I threw up earlier of the statue that's in the town of La Bissère Saint Marie that this portrays a young woman by the name of Jeanne Vallée, who the creature came out of the woods. It attacked her and her little brother, and she took a pike and she actually fended off the beast. And she and her little brother survived to tell the tale, which is quite remarkable. She was a very, very young girl, and she drove off this massive animal that had been at this point killing, without repercussion for almost a year at that time. So it was a remarkable thing. She's considered quite a hero in that part of the country, and the people of what's the modern Gévaudan region are still very proud of this legend. They're proud of it because it put their area on the map. So you can find monuments, you can find testaments to the creature. There's a museum in the town of Saugué about the creature. So it's a very, very well-known legend, but it's also one that, like so many other great myths, it doesn't have an answer. We don't know what the creature was. It was shot multiple times by multiple hunters. They said that this thing would shrug off bullets. In fact, it was allegedly killed by the king's dragoons. We mentioned earlier that King Louis XV sent dragoons to this region to try to finally root out the beast after it had killed so many people. And one of the dragoons actually did shoot and kill an enormous wolf, which they brought back to Paris, and they ended up stuffing the animal or Versailles, I guess it was, stuffing the animal and putting it on display, at which time the king officially declared that the beast was dead. But the truth is that this animal that they killed was simply an enormous wolf. It was not unusual in any way other than being on the larger side. And the killings did not stop by any means in the Gévaudan region. They continued fiercely. And so when the people cried out to the king and said, listen, I know you shot a wolf, but the wolf was clearly not the beast. We're continuing to die here. The king said, nope, we killed the beast, and basically washed his hands of the entire thing and left the people of the Gévaudan region to fend for themselves. And so going forward from that point, the people did have to destroy the creature on their own. Now, in 1767, 3 years into the predations of the beast, it was finally allegedly killed again by a hunter by the name of Jean Chastel. And Chastel is also celebrated in the Gévaudan region. There are statues of him and monuments that sort of honor his presence. But a lot of people say that even that was not the true beast, because everything that appears to have been shot by these hunters, appears to have been an ordinary wolf. And the truth is that because these people had seen wolves time and time again, even a large wolf, they probably would not have considered it to be anything extraordinary or supernatural. They simply would have said they were being attacked by a wolf. This thing, the range that it had, the savagery of the attacks, the fact that it frequently decapitated its victims and carried the heads away, none of this was typical behavior for any kind of wolf. And if the wolf, for instance, people have suggested if it was rabid, it would of course have a different pattern of behavior, but it wouldn't have survived for 3 years to continue killing. So it remains an extraordinary mystery. And my plan is to, in late April of this year, I'll be traveling to the Gévaudan region, staying in several different small towns around the area that were where the beast preyed, and walk the hills where it fed on people, go to Mount Mouchet and to see and speak to the people, hopefully, and get an idea of sort of the legacy of the beast before I do the final chapters of the upcoming book. So let's see, what else do we have here? Mixture of Belle and Buffy. Yes, absolutely. Well, I tell you, she took that beast down and it never turned into a prince to the best of my knowledge. But yeah, well, the reason of, by the way, you say it sounds like a shapeshifter, Sarah. I fully agree. In fact, the werewolf legend has cropped up around this creature, and it's certainly one of the most well-known werewolf legends. In fact, again, I'll give away the ghost a little bit. We'll do a full episode on this later. But one of the stories that surrounds it, and it's impossible with a legend like this sometimes to separate fact from fiction. One of the strangest things about werewolf folklore is that, unlike Dracula or Frankenstein, where you have this great work of literary, of this great work of literary fiction that's kind of established the rules, so we kind of understand these creatures. There's no great literary work that gives us the laws of the werewolf. We only have folklore, and folklore changes from generation to generation. It changes from culture to culture, and so a lot of what we think of when we imagine werewolves, like changing under the full moon, being bitten by a werewolf and infecting somebody else so that they become a werewolf as well. These are actually based on cinematic werewolves. Werewolves, especially that came from the Universal monster movies of the 1940s and 1950s, the Wolfman, Return of the Wolfman, things like that. So the truth is that a lot of that legend is based on fiction purely. But one piece of folklore that does seem to track back, fairly early in werewolf lore is the idea of the sacred silver being something that could potentially kill a werewolf, probably because they were considered to be creatures of the supernatural, and silver has often been considered to be a pure metal. So one of the interesting stories is that Jean Chastel, the man who allegedly finally killed the beast, is said to have either taken a bullet made from a sacred medallion of silver, or even they say that he cut a silver button off of his own coat and stuffed it down the barrel of the muzzle of his gun and fired because the animal was shaking off ordinary bullets. And it's said that silver, possibly blessed silver medallion, is what ended up killing the creature. So the werewolf legend has certainly followed it for the last 250, 260 odd years, and that is the angle that is going to drive forth the book that I'll be working on. So. Was there a prominent shapeshifter culture in that area? Well, yes, actually. Interestingly enough, Germany, France, England, all of these areas had shapeshifters, but in France especially, there were some extraordinary werewolf trials. I know, of course, we're all familiar with the witch trials, but the truth is that werewolf trials were not uncommon as well. In fact, people who were allegedly werewolves were frequently tried. Sometimes they were executed under the belief that they were lycanthropes or shapeshifters, believing that they'd sold their soul to the devil. Other times, in a case of a young man named, there's a lot of these people named Jean, by the way. It's just such a common French name, but Jean Grenier was a 16-year-old boy who ended up being captured while he was attempting to attack a young girl in the fields, not in the Gévaudan region, quite a bit west of there, in fact. But he was captured, and when he was captured, Jean Grenier claimed that he was in fact a werewolf and that he would wear a wolf skin, transform into the wolf, and in doing so, that he liked to feed on children. And when he was pressed about it, rather than denying it, he claimed that a man he called the Lord of the Forest had met him in the woods one day, had given him a sacred wolf skin and this salve he would rub on his body, and then the two of them would run in the woods and hunt together. And so he claimed that he was a werewolf, basically in service to this Lord of the Forest, which of course the people of the French authorities interpreted as the devil. And so he was confined to a monastery. He was not executed. He was confined to a monastery for the rest of his natural life, and he remained completely feral and savage for the rest of his natural life, which wasn't terribly long. I think he died in his 30s, but he's the trial records for Jean Grenier exist. He was a real person. Whether he was simply insane or whether he really had met some mysterious man in the forest who gave him a wolf skin, we can't know. But yes, there is absolutely a wonderful amount of shapeshifter legend all throughout that region of Europe, really. As I say, France, Spain, Portugal, into England and Germany. In Germany, you have Peter Stubb, the werewolf of Bedburg, who has a very similar story, although he was an adult, and it seems that unfortunately his predation was a little bit more sexual in nature. But this folklore continues to exist and is very, very common all throughout that region. So let's see. Don't get eaten. Well, I'm going to try not to get eaten, but I figure if the worst case scenario, maybe I'll get bitten and come back as a werewolf. I could think of worse fates than that. Shapeshifter trope, like many others, seems to persist across many global cultures. It very much does. It's actually one of the oldest pieces of folklore in human history. I don't know, Sarah, if you ever got a chance to watch the very first episode we ever did. We did an episode on werewolves and shapeshifters with the very first episode of Monday Night Monsters, and we talked a lot about the primitive prehistoric origins of shapeshifting magic and of werewolf legends and the various shapeshifters all throughout cultures. And the truth is, one of the interesting things about lycanthropy or shapeshifting is that it's one of the monsters in human history that doesn't start out with evil. It actually tends to start out with a great deal of sacred practice. These were people who took on the aspect of animals in order to hunt. They did it for religious purposes. And even in old medieval folklore, you can find heroic werewolves. At a point in time when witches were being burned and heretics were considered to be monstrous, there are actually still stories of heroic werewolves, and they are in things like the old Arthurian legend has a wonderful story about a knight called Maroc who would turn into a wolf. We have the Lay of Bisclavre, which was written by Marie of France in the 12th century, about a knight who became a werewolf, was betrayed by his wife, but became became the favorite of the king, and the king is the one who ended up imprisoning the wife, getting the knight his clothes back, which had been stolen by the faithless wife, which denied him the power to turn back into a wolf. But he's a heroic werewolf character. There's even a wonderful story called The Werewolf and the King of Pallerne that is about a young prince who was destined to be king, a real historic prince destined to be king, who avoided an assassination plot when a kindly werewolf actually raised him from childhood. I mean, it's very strange how many of these legends really exist. So there's a great deal of sacred shapeshifting in history, and I've never particularly considered the werewolves to be the evil creatures, the ravening creatures that they're portrayed in later medieval history, which is where most of our modern werewolf folklore comes from. Silver Button appears in The Thing in the Woods by Harper Williams. Now, I actually would have to admit, I haven't read that, John, so I'm going to have to check that one out. Thank you for mentioning that. You know, it's bizarre as it is to say, and I know it tends to maybe tend to assume that people like Ron and I have read every bit and piece on these subjects that we talk about. I wish I could say it was true. There's so many wonderful old werewolf legends and books about werewolf shapeshifters and monsters that I have yet to read. And so we often have a kind of a narrow scope in what we read. A lot of times, even just doing research for these programs, what we frequently do is read what we need to read to get the information, especially the boiled down information. So yes, absolutely. Thank you for that suggestion. I'm going to have to look that one up. Very first episode was werewolves. It was indeed, yes. So that was our very first one, which was one that Ron and I easily agreed on because we were both huge lovers of werewolf legends and werewolf folklore. But at that time, even a year ago when we did our very first episode, we're coming very close to a year now since we launched Monday Night Monsters originally. I had not yet planned on doing the werewolf book that's next on my agenda. But after I did the Dracula book, I'm sure some of you remember that I published a book called Hunting Dracula this past October. After I did that, I was thinking about another project that I wanted to do, and I realized that I'd always wanted to go to France and always wanted to go to the source of the Gévaudan legend. And so, as is what I usually do, I thought I can't afford that. And then the next day I bought a plane ticket anyway. So I may not be able to afford it, but I'm going to go anyway. That's my plan. Downloaded the audiobook from LibriVox of the, is that of The Thing in the Woods, or I know there's actually a LibriVox audio of the Lay of Bisclavre, which I apologize. It's Bisclavret, I believe is how it's pronounced. It's an old Breton word, which I believe technically simply translates to werewolf, but the Lay of Bisclavre by Marie of France, a 12th century poem, a prose poem, and it's actually this wonderful story about this werewolf knight, which I've always loved. In fact, I've often told it as a fireside story when I've been camping because I think it's such a fun legend. So I don't know if that's what the one you were referring to, John, or if you actually meant the Thing in the Woods, which, as I say, I can't wait to check that out. So, okay, so yes, The Thing in the Woods, as you're saying. Should have done it as a tour. You know what? I have to tell you, Sarah, I love the idea of doing a tour. But the problem is, of course, is that I haven't been there yet. So I think I'd make a poor guide, at least on the first round. What I would love to do in the future, in fact, it's a great idea, going forward, is after I visited these places, like the time I spent, traveling through some of the vampire sites in England. I spent time, exploring legends in Germany and everything. But once so I actually know the area and know, the way around, then potentially I could create a tour. But it is difficult to do that on the first round because I wouldn't know what I was doing. And half the time when I go traveling abroad, I get lost along the way. So don't want to drag anybody into that until I really know what I'm doing. So. But who knows? It's a great idea. My good friend Dacre Stoker, I don't know if any of you are familiar with Dacre. Dacre is the great, probably several times more great grandnephew of Bram Stoker, who wrote the novel Dracula. And Dacre himself has co-authored several books that were officially sequels and prequels to Dracula. One is simply called Dracul. The other is called Dracula the Undead. Both great deal of fun. And now basically Dracula is his bread and butter. He leads tours to England. He leads tours to Romania. And he's a great guy. And he was tremendous help to me. Got me some great information when I was writing my Dracula book. So if you're ever interested in going, especially to Transylvania, which so many people I feel like believe that kind of thing is out of the reach, but you can travel to Transylvania. You can go to all the sites associated with both the historic and the fictional Dracula, and have an English-speaking guide and a Romanian guide, and it's a wonderful thing. So if you ever get a chance to do that, I highly recommend it. And if you look up Dacre, D-A-C-R-E, Dacre Stoker on social media, I think he's leading one in June or July, actually, going to Romania at this time. So they can be a little bit pricey, admittedly. There's no getting around that, but sometimes that's just the way of these things. I will say this: you can plan a trip on your own too, and it would tend to be a lot cheaper. But it is wonderful to have a knowledgeable guide with you and somebody who has, opened all the doors in advance and paved the way for you. So it's certainly worth the extra cash if you do decide to do one of these organized tours. So. Sometimes getting lost is fun. No, I could not agree with you more, Mary Beth. And being lost has actually resulted in me having more fun sometimes on my trips than knowing where I'm going. I may have told you this story, in a previous episode, because when I was in England, which was just this past April, on the trail of Dracula, I got lost for 7 hours on my way from the airport to Whitby because the GPS in my car that I had rented died. I didn't have any maps with me, which was very foolish, I have to admit. But even still, the point is, I didn't have any maps, and I all of a sudden found myself driving on the opposite side of the road for the first time ever, and driving through England with no map, no GPS, and only the vaguest idea of where I needed to go. And I got to give myself credit where credit is due. I'm very proud of myself. I still found my way to Whitby. It took me 5 hours longer than it should have, but I headed directly east, knowing that there was a coastal city called Hull that was right on the coast. And I knew that it was fairly directly east of Leeds, where I flew in. And once I eventually found the highway, which took long enough, I started seeing signs for Hull. I went to Hull because I knew that if I got to Hull and then turned up the coast, Hull is directly on the coast and Whitby is directly on the coast. So I knew I could follow the coast up to Whitby and eventually would find my way there. It worked. It added an amazingly long drive and I had to gas up at least once during the trip, and I was a little freaked out. I'm not going to lie. I was in a foreign country with no idea where I was going, but I found my way to Whitby. And and I saw a lot of villages I wouldn't have seen otherwise. So that was a good thing. But I've been lost in England. I've been lost in Germany. I was lost on Frankenstein Mountain. I think I told you that at one point, during one of my one of our previous episodes. And finding my way to Castle Frankenstein through the mountains, and then decided to just light off into the woods in the direction I assumed it was. I did eventually find it, but there were moments I thought that I would die on Frankenstein Mountain. So some of my best adventures have been the ones without a map. Yeah, Sarah, you know what? Having a guide is a great way to go, especially because not everybody, feels confident traveling on their own. I have a tendency to travel on my own. I do travel alone. It was not always that way. I was very timid about travel for a very long time. And I think that when I went to Romania, which was many, many years ago now, but when I went to Romania, that was the first time I ever decided that I wanted to do something on my own, and something that seemed a little bit crazy at the time. But you build confidence doing that kind of thing, and you still get into trouble, and you still get lost, and sometimes you just have to try to keep a level head. But having a guide is irreplaceable, and it does make the process much less stressful, and you tend to experience more when you've got a guide. So it's certainly worthwhile. Get me chipped. Yes. Actually, I should probably get a microchip, because one of these days I am going to get lost and not come back. And it'd be nice if one of you guys could whip out the GPS and track me down. So get lost in Ireland somewhere. I have to tell you, Ireland's a place I have not yet been. I would absolutely love to go to Ireland. It is high on my list of places. Scotland is actually a little bit higher up the food chain from Ireland for me, only because I do have a lot of heritage in Scotland. My last name is Rondina, not exactly a Scottish name. That's a good Italian name, but that's just half of my family. The other half are the McClures, and the McClures are from northwestern Scotland in the area of the Isle of Skye, and it's an area that was certainly overrun with Vikings during the 800s, 900s, and going forward. So I like to believe that I've got some Viking blood in me somewhere. And my family has always been sort of a nautical and sailing family. So I figured there's got to be a little bit of heritage of that in me. But Scotland is pretty much one or two clicks from now. I got a couple of trips I need to get in before I go back to Scotland. I planned to go to Scotland when I was in England last April, but unfortunately COVID ended up nipping me in the bud. Not because I got COVID, because when I got to the airport in England in Leeds, the very first thing that I was told is to not forget that I had to have a COVID test within 24 hours of returning from England to America, which no step prior to that had let me know that. So I wasn't prepared for that. And unfortunately, the area I was planning on going to in northern England was very remote, and I had no idea if I'd be able to arrange to find someplace to get a COVID test there. So unfortunately, I actually had to shave a day off my trip, return to Leeds early, because I knew that at the airport that there was a place that I would be able to get a COVID test. So I ended up having to sort of shave that extra day off, and it took unfortunately, it nipped my plans to go to Hermitage Castle, which is a wonderful ruined castle with some great old legends behind it in Scotland, a little over the border from where I was. So that didn't happen that time. I figured it was a good excuse to go back to Scotland and spend some quality time there. So that's definitely the plan of attack for a couple of trips down the line here. My plan right now, I'm not getting any younger, but I figure that if I can get one overseas trip in a year going forward, I'll be able to knock off most of my bucket list before I kick the bucket. So that's the plan. Mary Beth, I don't know if you're Scottish at all, but that's no excuse not to go. It's a beautiful country. It's I love these countries that have these huge rolling open spaces. That was one of the most wonderful things about northern England near the Scottish border. Even the villages up there look like something out of a picture book. If you ever watch British television, it's like every single British murder mystery takes place in this little tiny hole in the wall town. If you look up a town called Croglin, Croglin, Croglin. That's where I was. That was my big Northern England destination when I was there last year. And it's like 10 houses, a church, a cemetery, and nothing else for miles around. It was extraordinary. And the only bad news about it, of course, is trying to find a public restroom when you're in a village like that is virtually impossible. But luckily they've got a lot of shrubbery and sheep, so that worked out just fine. English, German, and Polish. Well, that's actually a good mix. I'm English, Scottish, a little bit of Canadian French thrown in there for good measure. My mom got around, I guess. And on the other side, Italian and Portuguese. So I've got a nice, good mix. And like I say, there's some nautical heritage in just about all of those heritages. So I figure I should have been a sailor, but I never learned. I think the reason is the first time I tried to sail a boat, I had the boom hit me right in the face and knocked me off the boat. So I was clearly not meant to be a man of the sea. So if anybody, by the way, out there has just joined us, and you may have noticed that we were intended to do an episode on Jack the Ripper this week, but unfortunately, Ron, my co-host, had a work conflict and was not able to make it. So I'm going to throw up our little notification here just for a moment for those of you who may have joined us later in the in the program here, but we will be delaying our episode of Monday Night Mysteries, Myths and Monsters until next Monday, which is the 30th. And at that time, we are officially moving to a 9 p.m. time slot. That 9 p.m. time slot is going to push us a little bit later. It's going to allow a little bit more flexibility, especially for Ron, who has a job that can be a little bit unpredictable from time to time. So do hopefully join us next week at 9 p.m. for Monday Night Monsters, when we will fulfill our obligation and do our Jack the Ripper episode, which I'm very much looking forward to. Jessica Fletcher. Well, she's from Maine, to the best of my knowledge. Is that not correct? Let's see, just looking at some of your comments here, see if I missed anything important. Have I done any traveling in Asia or South America? No, I have not. You know, it's interesting, as I was saying a little while ago, that for a long time I didn't travel. Part of it was that, I'm, whatever anyone else thinks of me, I've certainly published quite a few books, but I don't make a tremendous amount of money. And for a long time, my opinion was that traveling, especially traveling overseas, was for people who had a lot of money to burn, which I didn't. And after many years of not traveling, I'd been to Germany and I'd been to Romania. This was all many, many, many years ago. But after years of not traveling, when I was working on finally doing the Dracula book that I'd wanted to do for so long, I thought, I can't finish my Dracula book without doing the flip side of the Dracula research. I had spent time in Romania many, many years before that. But I thought I have to go to England, Northern England, Whitby, and places that were connected to the novel Dracula. And so I decided to price it out and see what I could do. And as I had learned previously on my trip to Germany when I was researching the Headless Horseman, the prices were doable. Now that unfortunately happened right before COVID hit. And I actually was 12 days shy of boarding my plane for England when the official lockdowns all went into place. So I ended up having to delay my trip to England for 2 years, and finally, very fortunately, got to fulfill that trip in April of last year, which is what allowed me to get the rest of the research done, finish the book. But most of my travel has been in Europe and Eastern Europe. That's it. So as I said, I spent time in Romania, spent time in Germany, Holland, Switzerland, now a little bit of time in England, and at this point, that's pretty much all of my international travel, with a little stopover in Iceland once upon a time, and be stopping over in Ireland. But unfortunately, I don't count it if you don't get to leave the airport. So as much as I love the fact that I've been to Iceland, I've got a lot more exploring I'd like to do there too. There's a lot of Arctic locations that I'd like to get to before the clock ticks down. So, but no, haven't really, as I say, unfortunately, nothing really in Asia or the Far East. There are definitely places that I would love to visit. I would love to go to Tibet. I'd love to go to Nepal. There's places that I have wanted to go to for a very long time, but I always have to have a topic. That's how I work. And so usually it's going to be the subject of a book or the subject of some significant study. And so unfortunately, since Asian folklore isn't really my ballywick, it's probably going to be a while before Asia opens up for exploration, sort of, at least internally here. All right. Yes. Oh no, I'm familiar with Murder, She Wrote. Although I have to say, I never really watched it. At the time that Murder, She Wrote aired, I was, it's very easy to sort of write shows like that off as kind of, something that old folks watch. And I was a lot younger back then and kind of, poo-pooed the show. But I know so many people who are tremendous fans of it. And I figure since I do love Angela Lansbury, I think she was one of the greatest actresses of hers or any generation. She was kind of a national treasure. And so I think I owe it to the show to give it a watch. I mean, and I don't mind shows that are kind of lighthearted and have a little bit of a comedic bent to it, which I know that Murder, She Wrote had a little element of that to it as well. So I promise one of these days I will get around and give Murder, She Wrote a good watch. A lot of similarities between Asian cryptids and European counterparts. Yes, that is certainly true. I mean, one of the things about human culture is that as though it doesn't always seem that way, we did all come from one place. Once upon a time, somewhere in Central Asia, humanity kind of, Central Asia or the African continent, humanity kind of made the leap from being, sort of just another species of animal to something a little bit different. We made that evolutionary leap. People have suggested a lot of reasons why why we made it. I think one of the most fascinating suggestions is that early humans may have actually ingested fungus like psilocybin mushrooms, which have a remarkable effect on the brain, and that sort of kickstarted the imagination, which is the defining feature, I think, of the human brain. I mean, we have the ability to do something that, to the best of our knowledge, at least as far as we can tell, no other animal species has, which is the idea to envision things that are not in front of us, to basically think things like, who am I, or what will I do next week? All other animals, as far as we can tell, again, this is it's very subjective to say this, but as far as we can tell, other animals only deal in the now. They're very, very focused on what, am I hungry now? Do I want to mate? Do I want to feed? Am I, fighting? Am I fleeing? That kind of thing. It's all very immediate. Even incredibly intelligent animals, we don't see any indication that they think about the future, at least nothing that we can see. Part of that, comes from the fact that they don't really build complex structures or anything like that. But our ability to see into the future, our ability to imagine things that require multiple steps, I think does separate us from most of the other creatures in the animal kingdom. And that imagination gave us the ability to envision magic and spirits and gods and creatures that we may never have heard of. And I think that we all kind of spread out from those central places where humanity, was born, and carried those ideas with us. But as we divided, we gave them each their own identity. And so there are shapeshifters in every culture on Earth. There are ghosts in every culture on Earth. There are, wild men and hairy creatures. There are flying, mystery monsters and things like that in every single culture on Earth. But they do change a lot as you go from culture to culture. And it's one of the reasons why we have so many similarities, but also often radical differences. I mean, there's dragons in every culture, and you have to imagine that the existence of dragons, trust me when I tell you that if Game of Thrones style giant winged dragons existed, I would be the happiest person on earth. I'd be happy to be eaten by a dragon just to know that they exist, because I think that they're one of the most extraordinary characters in folklore. But the truth is that the fact that every culture on Earth has some variation on dragons probably suggests that it is based on something that, in some sort of communal memory, we once did exist, like dinosaurs. Some variation on dinosaurs, probably. I would imagine. I mean, between pterodactyls and Tyrannosaurus rexes and all the various enormous lizards that once lived on the Earth, they did live on Earth long before humans did, but other mammals existed at that time. And I figured that some residual memory of that may have given us the myth of dragons. But yes, by far, every culture on Earth, every section, every area on Earth, Asia, South America, the native peoples of like the northern Arctic, all have these similar legends that do seem to cross-pollinate quite a bit. And of course, the Native Americans, who have a much older and sort of a more sacred grasp on this country than we do. A lot of their legends all cross over with our own as well. So. Some animals understand time enough to know a basic schedule. Yes, well, believe me, that's true. I can tell you that at 5:30 a.m. on the dot, when my cat is stomping on my head and poking me in the nose to feed him, he's got a schedule down pat. In fact, talking about the idea of animals not being able, potentially not being able to sort of predict things or see things in the future, multi-steps, that's not 100% true. The truth is that there are experiments they've done with crows and ravens, who are among the most intelligent animals in the bird kingdom, can make multi-step processes in order to solve puzzles. They've actually done things where they've hidden a treat or food at the end of a maze that doesn't just simply need to be navigated with one step, but the animal might need to pick up a stick, use the stick to push it through a hole to push a button, and that button is going to release a string, and the string has to be pulled in order to open a door so that the animal can get to the treat. And these corvids are able to do this, and not just once, but time and time again, which is remarkable. So I'm not selling animals short. I'm only saying that by the standards that we reckon sort of self-awareness, identity, and sentience, there are no animals we've found to date that have the degree of imagination and forethought and sort of self-identity that we as humans have. And I mean, every species on Earth has a gift of some kind. It does seem that gift of imagination and sort of self-identity appears to be the human gift. If other animals evolve to develop it, then I think we'll know about it, because the first time they start building devices and things like that, I think it's going to be pretty evident. And I wouldn't mind that. I think there are animals that I think could get a shot at running the planet. We're not always doing such a good job. You hated the game Mousetrap. I have to tell you, I never owned a copy of that game. I had some friends growing up that had the game Mousetrap, and I never really got to play with it very much. But I do like that kind of thing. I have the feeling that I would get a kick out of playing any kind of a game where you get to build a multi-part device like that. I don't know if I remember correctly. I think Mousetrap didn't have a lot of variations. I think you had to get it right the way that the creators intended it, which isn't quite the same thing as invention. But I think I've had a good time with it. So let's see. When it's time for my daughter-in-law to come home, her cat is waiting by the door looking out the window. Yes, again, so animals definitely have a sense of sort of a circadian rhythm, an idea of time. They don't seem to understand time quite the same way we do. It's often been mentioned that if you go away, that your pets don't understand that you've been gone, whether you've been gone for a day or a month. They don't really have time perspective on that, but on a just day and night sequential cycle, they do seem to recognize times of day. And that makes a lot of sense, because there are visual cues that kind of thing, and they have better senses than we do by far. And so even on a cloudy day, I imagine that they can detect the location of the sun. They do seem to have a much better perspective on the sort of natural order than we do. So yes, it's absolutely, it's a certainty that they have that degree of perception of time, but no apparent sense of self-awareness. Again, we've never seen evidence that animals have any. They say ignorance is bliss, and maybe it is, that they don't seem to ever question their place in the universe, wonder who I am, or, does my owner love me, or anything like that. I mean, I guess one of the reasons that they forgive us when we're not good owners, I think, is the fact that they don't seem to ever question our love. I mean, they've got to experience firsthand we're either mean to them or we're good to them. And I think that if the good way is out, they end up forgiving us for most things, which is good, because Lord knows my cats have a right to hate me every once in a while, because I've forgotten about filling that food bowl more than once, and I don't know if I'd forgive myself for that. We don't have any ravens here. That's correct. Yes. I have a tendency, and this is a terrible habit, which is left over from when I was much younger, to conflate ravens and crows, even though I know that they're both corvids. They're very, very different species. And it is true that primarily you get ravens in Europe. I know there's other areas of the world where they must exist, but no, we get much smaller corvids here for the most part, but they really are amazing animals. They are incredibly intelligent. They're loyal. They can mimic voices, which is amazing. I mean, a lot of birds can do that. Really interestingly, I think birds are the only animals in the animal kingdom that can seem to be able to mimic human voices, which is remarkable. People talk about, apes eventually learning to speak. That's the whole sort of, starting crux of the Planets of the Apes movies. But birds, I think, are the ones that are most likely to learn to speak before the apes ever do. So. Have I ever done a show on animism? Not specifically. Again, we've done shows where we talked about, sort of animal shape-shifting. We've done them about sort of, sacred spirituality that involves animism, but we've never specifically focused on animism. But now, as I say, because we have broken out of our original idea when we started, we were Monday Night Monsters, and almost all of our shows were going to be focused on the idea of monsters of myth and legend. Now that we're doing myths and mysteries as well, it kind of breaks that mold, and hopefully we'll be able to get to subjects like that. There are so many extraordinary topics like that we have yet to cover, and we're going to try to keep this going. And as I say, always looking for good ideas, and so that's a wonderful one as well. Thank you. So I have to tell you, funny thing is, it was not my intention when I came on this evening to do a full hour show. I was just really going to pop in for the folks who didn't get the message that we were postponing the show, and just chat for a few minutes, and sort of out of politeness, but it's you know what, it's almost 8:50, and so we've managed to get most of an hour of a show out of me just rambling incessantly at the screen. So hopefully didn't bore you guys too much with this or anything, but I'm glad that y'all came aboard anyway and stuck around with me and chatted. And so always nice to have you guys. We've got a lot of wonderful regulars in here. Sarah, John, Mary Beth, all here tonight. It looks like we're missing a couple of people who are usually regulars, but they probably saw our posts on social media, so that's perfectly fine as well. And so once again, in case anybody came in late, a reminder that we will be doing our Jack the Ripper show next week, Monday, January 30th, and that will be with the official changeover to our 9 p.m. time slot. As I say, we are doing that because of Ron's schedule, and we want to make sure that we can get Ron back on here, because having that back and forth with Ron every week is great fun. I mean, Ron and I both have very similar sort of perspectives on a lot of things, but we don't always see eye to eye, and I think that's what makes this show a lot of fun. And also, it's always such an education. We've done plenty of shows on topics that prior to deciding to do the show, I know I wasn't terribly familiar with, and it's been wonderfully educational as well. It gives us a chance to broaden our horizons, and hopefully, with a little bit of homework and, I have a great deal of fun. I set up all the slides for the show. Hopefully it gives us a chance to bring you guys some fun information you may never have heard of as well. And obviously, as we've, note almost every week, Ron and I are both big movie buffs as well. And almost all of the topics that we talk about are also the subject of various movies and everything, because I, for one, love to watch monster movies. I love to watch movies about mythology and fantasy and everything like that. And so we've got some really fun Jack the Ripper movies that we're going to be suggesting next week. Not all of them are horror either. There's some science fiction thrown in there, and there's even a few comedy Jack the Ripper movies out there, which may sound a little bit strange, but there's some movies out there that have some real fun with the subject. Some of them were intentional comedies. Some of them were just funny unintentionally. So we are looking forward to that. But at the earlier part of the show, I'm going to throw up a couple of screens again. I was also taking this advantage, figure I got the screen to myself this week. So I just want to remind everybody one more time that if you're interested in following my upcoming trip to France, where I will be talking about or be researching the legend of the Beast of Gévaudan, one of the greatest werewolf legends in history, took place in the villages of Auvers, La Bessière-Sainte-Marie, Apcher, all these different villages in very rural France. You can go to my website, which is ghostboypress.com, and I'm doing pre-orders for the upcoming release later in 2023 of my book Hunting the Beast, Tracking the Werewolves of Gévaudan. And so I am looking forward to that. It's going to be a great trip, and I am very much looking forward to exploring that region of France. It's a place that I have never been to. So feel free to pre-order. It is a limited edition. As with all of my pre-orders, there will be a 100 copies of the hardcover edition of Hunting the Beast will be available. Every one of those is going to be hand numbered and signed. And so if you are interested in picking up a copy of that, pop by the website, and that is available now. I also, of course, have for sale on my website my other books. Currently, I have Hunting Dracula, my most recent publication on the folklore and legends behind the legend of Vlad Dracula and how he came to inspire so much of the creation of Bram Stoker's famous vampire. I have my book Legends of Sleepy Hollow, which was published on the 200th anniversary of the novella The Legend of Sleepy Hollow. It talks all about the origins of that. It actually contains Washington Irving's original complete story, The Legend of Sleepy Hollow, but then goes into the history, and even for the first time ever identifies the Hessian, the German soldier who was the inspiration for the Headless Horseman. And last but not least, I have my book Ghosts of New England, and that, of course, is ghost legends and folklore from all over New England, which is my home turf, and even has my own first encounter with a ghost in there. So all of those are available at ghostboypress.com. If any of you are interested, you're always welcome to check that out. Androids and automatons. That's an interesting thought. I have to say, I never really thought about doing that, but it is an interesting idea, especially right now with artificial intelligence growing by leaps and bounds. I'm sure that many of you have seen in the last couple of months these AI portraits that have become very, very popular. And I did a little fun experimentation with that on my own Facebook page, and I was amazed, absolutely stunned. I mean, I went to one of these sites and I submitted about 15 pictures of my myself, none of them terribly, good quality pictures of myself. And using those, this AI site generated these remarkable portraits of me in different historic, periods and historic looks, many of them making me look very young and virile, which I was absolutely delighted with. But artificial intelligence is so extraordinary these days that it's generating paintings and artwork, it's generating text and prose, and often impossible to tell it from something that a human being wrote. That's a little terrifying in some ways, but it's also fascinating. And the way that of course, ties into androids and automatons. I'm sure that some of you have seen the footage of some of these androids and robots that places like MIT have been building, which no longer have that jerky robotic movement. They're incredibly smooth, and they literally move like living creatures. And some of them have amazing balance, can run on two legs, can be struck with something and then still maintain their balance. They're moving by leaps and bounds. And when you combine the idea of these robotic creatures and artificial intelligence, I don't know how far we are from the Terminator here. I mean, as I say, it's this kind of thing where, depending on your perspective, whether you're a glass half full or glass half empty person, it's easy to believe that these artificial intelligences and robotic creatures combined may eventually become a form of life unto themselves, capable of independent thought. I mean, that may not happen on our lifetimes, but it no longer seems like an impossibility. So yes, actually, I think that's a fantastic idea for a show. And that is definitely one I would need to learn a lot more about. I am not an expert by any means. Honestly, all of my knowledge of robotics comes from watching Star Trek and science fiction movies. So I think it would be a fascinating topic, and it's one that I'm going to put in the hopper. So thank you for that. I do look like Jonathan Frakes. As a matter of fact, it's very funny. We did a show a couple of days ago. I don't know if any of you follow the Paranormal Couples Haunted Museum, which is also here on Dead Air of Full Spectrum. Our Cody and Satori do this program every week, and Cody recently had hip surgery and so on, was not able to make it last week. So a bunch of us that from the other channels got together and we did kind of a fill-in fun show for him. And I introduced myself as Jonathan Frakes for the fun of it. I do get that a lot. And even these days, Jonathan Frakes and I have exactly the same white in our beards. So one of these days I'm going to dress up as Commander Riker and go to one of these conventions, and maybe people will pay me for autographs. Who knows? Golems. We actually did talk about golems. We didn't do an entire show on them precisely, but we did our Frankenstein episode. We did the Frankenstein episode quite a while ago. It was mid last year, like maybe before the summer last year. But our golem episode, we talked a great deal about, our Frankenstein episode, we talked a great deal about golems because, in a way, the Frankenstein creature, from an alchemical sense or an alchemist sense, very much owed itself to the golems of legend. It's in some fantasies actually referred to as a flesh golem. Of course, the golem or golem, I believe is maybe how it's correctly pronounced, is a creature artificially brought to life, much the way we are talking about artificial intelligence, in these androids, because an android, I guess, in a lot of ways, is another form of golem. But in old Hebrew myth, was created of clay to be a guardian of the Jewish people, and words were written on the forehead or on a piece of paper and placed in the golem's mouth. These magical words, which are basically, I believe in ancient Hebraic or Abrahamic language, was the breath of life that you could give. And of course, this is something that, from a biblical perspective, would have probably been considered to be blasphemy, but alchemy has often been considered to be blasphemous. And so it does come from the area of myth and legend, but it is a fascinating story. And so if you get a chance to watch our Frankenstein episode, you definitely should, because it talk a lot about golems and about their sort of heritage and connection to that. The Frankenstein episode was great fun to do. One of the things that's unfortunate about some of our earlier episodes is that we have had significant connection problems in past episodes, which has resulted in some really, really spotty broadcast, and we've cut out at different times and everything like that. So some of our older episodes, unfortunately, can be a little bit difficult to watch. But if you bear with them, there's some really good information out there. And we had a great deal of fun doing them. Sometimes I wish we could go back and redo every one of them, but obviously we wouldn't be able to hit all the same points. So, Well, folks out there, thank you so much for sticking with me tonight. As I say, it was this was kind of a seat of my pants show, because Ron wasn't able to make it this evening. But hopefully, y'all had some fun, and I was able to answer some of your questions. You hopefully all join us next week at 9 p.m. on Monday the 30th for our Jack the Ripper episode. And one last time before we go, I do want to remind you that if you're interested in taking a look at my own books and some of the things that I've done in the past, you can visit ghostboypress.com, where you can pre-order a copy of Hunting the Beast, which will be out late in 2023. You can pick up Hunting Dracula, which is available for sale now. You can pick up Ghosts of New England, Legends of Sleepy Hollow, and more to come. So hopefully you guys had some fun this evening. I had a great deal of fun chatting with you and hanging out with you, as I always do. So I want to say a very big thank you to you guys. We will see you in 1 week at 9 p.m. for Jack the Ripper on Monday Night Mysteries, Myths, and Monsters. So you guys have a wonderful night. Thank you.